One of the purest ways to engage with art is through its soul. And that's exactly what the four panelists today on stage in their individual spheres have been doing. It's a tough call, it's a tough road. So they have defied the hegemonies, the hierarchies that exist in the art and the city life and have looked for very, very positive affirmations and collaborations and gone on to create their art and soul spaces in the city in the conundrum that we call cities. So cheers to our panelists. There is another mic. A quick check. So, for the flow of discussions, I'm just going to ask all the panelists to give us opening remarks on what do they think, what is their perspective on what constitute the elements of art and soul of a city. We begin with you, Jagdish.
Well, I think the first thing we need to say is which city. Bangalore, I'm not a Bangalorean in that I wasn't born here. I came here when my wife Arundhati and I came back from England and settled in Bangalore. My parents are from Madras, Tamil Nadu. I was born in Bombay. My wife is Bengali, born in Calcutta. We met in London and we came back and settled here. So which city? Because I still remember people like our friend Brian Cox, now a very well-known actor in Hollywood. He was here where he played the lead in the Scottish play. I don't need to mention the play because I believe it's bad luck. And in the Scottish play, he played obviously the lead, and I interviewed him on All India Radio. That was how long ago it was. All India Radio. And I asked him about differences in the cities. And he gave me a rundown from Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Madras. And in Madras, he said, they were saying the play along with us. So I said, please, you got to repeat that because I don't. I said, they were saying the play along with us. And after the interview, I took him back to the Bangalore club, bought him a couple of beers, and he said, you know, we did the most unthinkable thing that no amateur would do. We were peeking through the curtains when we were not on stage to see if anybody had a copy of the script. They didn't. They knew the blooming thing by heart. Now, this is Madras. So in Bangalore, what are we talking about? Because Bangalore has another great area, which I respect very much, which we seem never to talk about, that is Bangalore city. And the famous, who was it? I think you might be able to tell me, Vasu. The Hudson Bay divide, a Hudson Circle divide. There's a Hudson Circle in Bangalore. Beyond that, as far as we're concerned, you are in Bangalore city. We are in Bangalore cantonment.
So intra-city culture.
Yeah, cantonment we are. And so what are we talking about when we talk about cities?
So we'll explore that, Jagdish.
Yeah.
We'll come to there are some cities which have a universal culture of the city, and then, of course, you know, the individual signatures. Kamini?
So what MAP hopes to do is to bring a new museum culture to Bangalore, because we really need to rethink the idea of museums. They cannot be just repositories of objects. MAP hopes to be a space for ideas and conversations that we initiate through the collection. So the collection becomes the tool to connect to the city. And we also want people to to have a different approach to the museum, because today, if you gave people a choice to say, well, do you want to go to the mall, do you want to go to a restaurant, do you want to go to a movie, or do you want to go to the museum? I don't see anyone breaking down the door to enter the museum. So we want to create a space where people have fun, where it becomes the first choice when you have time on a weekend. Where do I want to go with my family, where I can enjoy myself and I learn something as well. And it's such an exciting time in Bangalore because there are just so many new institutions and organizations coming up. You have the BIC, the Bangalore International Center, which is such a throbbing, vital space. Then you have the Indian Music Experience, which is such an interactive space for music. You have the Science Gallery that's opening next year. You have us, MAP, that's coming up. You have the State Museum, Vishvesharaya, all of this. So it's wonderful if we all create a network of museums, we all collaborate, and we just change the cultural landscape of the city. So that's what we're hoping to do.
So MAP goes for a November 2020 opening?
Yeah, we hope to open in November 2020 next year.
So, Lucy, as the artistic director of the Queensland's Poetry Festival, you have said in your works that cultural festivals are hubs which actually contribute to the well-being of a city.
That's right. I do think that cultural institutions, festivals, arts organisations, arts participation have a very, very tangible link to our health and well-being. Of course, community connectedness, avoiding isolation, feeling connected to each other, but also really tangible physical health benefits as well. And in terms of what constitutes the souls of cities, I think it does depend on the city, of course. I've worked for festivals and cultural organisations in about 4 different cities of Australia, and I think that every city is different. Every city's people. I guess what makes it the same is that every city is full of people with hearts and minds, and the hearts and minds create different work and have a different creative output depending on the traumas those cities have been through, the political turmoils, the ups and downs, and that's ubiquitous, regardless of the city you're in. That kind of, I think, the hearts and minds are what constitute the soul. And I think that, there's a lot of research that says participation, engagement in the arts and culture keeps us healthy. One really tangible example, I guess, is one of the biggest risk factors in suicidal contemplation, for example, is isolation. And something that the arts does is connect us to ourselves, to each other, to the world around us. And when you place that in the context of a festival, that's kind of on steroids, because you're very likely to become inspired, you're very likely to meet somebody like-minded, you're very likely to connect with someone who has common interests. And the arts speak directly to our hearts and our minds, so those common interests bond us in ways that other things just can't.
I think it's well worth to remember that when we are stuck in a Bangalore traffic jam, that it is, a collective of hearts and minds. So let's just segue into, since we spoke about festivals, Namita, you've been the curator of the Times Lit Festival, and the intent has always been to get unlikely voices, diverse voices. And so how does the festival space in the microcosm of Mumbai in the background, how has the festival space shaped?
So Bombay is essentially a city that has been fueled by commerce from the beginning. And so it's sort of a city that has always had culture and patronage, but I think it's essentially driven by money. And culture has largely been defined by the film industry and Bollywood, which presented quite a challenge when Bachi and I sort of started the Times Lit Fest. And so what we did, which actually ended up being really interesting, was that we sort of tried to create these spaces that I don't think had been done before, where we brought in sort of literature and cultural voices, but put them in conversation with people from, say, business or finance or fashion, and all these sort of very Bombay things, and created very new conversations. And so what we did in the process was firstly draw in a larger audience. So for example, if we had somebody who had written about, like a very sort of noir genre in literature, we'd find somebody in that space in Bollywood and bring them in and had them sort of talk about, their narratives where they intersected. And And what that did was brought in an audience which may not have otherwise come into a literary festival. What that also did was broke a lot of silos, because we tend to, put culture in one space, business in another space, blah, 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 and I think that it's really quite exciting when you mix up these voices and give everyone an opportunity to engage with that cultural side in them, because frankly, that's just part of like everyone's basic DNA. So just to give you an example, I remember we created this, when we curated this one panel discussion. It was called Skyline. And just for fun, we put together someone from real estate who was kind of the enemy, somebody who was a poet, a painter who like works with the city, and a lawyer. And it was a really fascinating kind of discussion, because it brought all these different elements in. There was friction, there was laughter. It was just fun. And so I think that's what we're trying to do a lot in the Lit Fest, and hope to continue, even though it got, well, killed.
Okay, it's a temporary blip. Let me just quickly take it back to Jagdish. Jagdish has created a fantastic place called Jagrati. So, entertainment, Jagdish, is a shifting mass of realities. I mean, much as we do not want to bite that reality, that bullet has to be bitten. So, in this insecure, shifting mass of reality that entertainment has been, and Jagrati has dedicated the space to music, to theatre, to performance. What has the journey been of Jagrati?
Well, we in fact will be 11 years old. Sorry, 9 years old in January of next year. And we've seen a whole shift in what people think of theatre. And the fact that today in fact, I'm sorry to have to tell you that not 6 weeks ago, the Gundecha brothers were on our stage. And
In fact, one of them has passed away.
Yes. And
it was a rare performance
shock for us to hear what has happened. And of course, after the show, we took them upstairs to our apartment, which is next door, and we had dinner together. Now, Gundecha brothers, Drupad, the music, it was packed. It was full. There were people waiting to get in, we had to turn them away. Now, then we have had people like the handlebars, the four madcaps on bicycles from England, who do a program on Shakespeare. But the greatest thing about them is they play the fool, they play the madcaps, but they do not change from the text. This above all, to the text be true. And they have a full house. Then we have our own plays, some of them written by local actors, local playwrights. Very houseful. So the question is, where do we think we do not have an audience? Which is a very strange thing, because during the week we have very few programs and the theatre is virtually dark. But we try, and in fact I think we are the only ones who do this. We have a very strong educational and training wing, where we have children going up for the Trinity College London drama and speech exams, which help a lot in audiences coming in. So we need to belong to a complex like the one you perhaps are talking about, where in England, in London, the West End contributes something like 12 billion pounds to the spend of the West End area. Pubs in the area, hot dog shops in the area, chaps pushing carts selling whatever they're selling. In New York, on Broadway, it is close to 20 billion US dollars, which contributes. This is the arts making a genuine monetary contribution to the welfare of the city. can we assess what we do over here? A, we are so far and so far apart. Rangashankara is 2 hours away from us, 2.5 hours away.
So hold that thought. We'll towards the end we'll segue into the straddling of creativity and commerce. Uh, while we've all touched upon what it takes to create these platforms, let's delve a bit deeper into the three arcs. That is the content, relatability, and its execution. So, do we impose what is the platform's responsibility to engage? What is the content programming that you do? Do you force it on the audience, or is there a feedback? I know that MAP is doing some work in terms of, and I think defining their terms of engagement. Would you want to take that first, Kamini?
Yeah. So MAP is looking to be a really inclusive space. You know, a space where anyone from the community can walk in and feel welcome. Because you need to be sensitive to what's happening in the community. What are the issues that are gripping your city? What are the issues that are gripping the country? And then see how your collection can connect you with what is happening in the city. So how do you take art out into the community? How do you bring the community back into the heart of the museum? And I also, we want to be in a totally inclusive space. Yes.
Speak into the mic.
You hear me? Yeah. And that's why, yeah, the collections that we have at least 6 categories. So it's not only pre-modern art, it's modern and contemporary, but it's also popular culture, it's photography, it's folk and tribal. So everyone in the community, wherever they are from, whatever culture they are from, whatever background they are from, feel that there is something in their lives that is reflected in the museum, and that's how they remain connected to the museum. And we also are trying to use technology. This is a tech city. So how do we use technology? Because I consider our generation the digital migrants. But there is a whole younger group out there who are the digital natives. So this is the language they speak. So we have to use their language to try and get them to connect to the collection. But we don't want to use, technology should not, it should enhance the experience while not overwhelming the experience. So that is a delicate balance we are trying to find.
Namita, you did mention on your way of combining any other innovative techniques that you all have done in your programming. How have you, while I know the Times Lit Festival is very well attended, how have you taken on the big elephant of Bollywood?
So the way we did it was by having fun. So for example, I remember...
Humor.
Well, not so much humor, but just doing things that, Rohinton Mystery had come to our festival, and in conversation we found out that he actually used to love singing Hindi movie songs. So he actually ended up singing a song from Mother India, because in his speech, his acceptance speech, when we gave him the Lifetime Achievement Award, and Mehboob Studios, where the festival is held, is where Mother India was shot. So, you actually can find lots of little spaces that go beyond the person's, books and the boring stuff, just basically. But at the same time, sort of like bring it in some way to engage with an audience that really wants to expand its horizons and yet not get bored. So I think that it's a very big challenge, and especially with a lot of young kids, short attention spans. So one of the other things that we've also tried to do is, the idea of storytelling has really moved beyond books. Like today you have some of the best storytelling in say, web series. Some of the best writing that's happening is in web series. So rather than bemoan the fact that people are moving away from books into Netflix, blah, blah, we tried to sort of like bring in new mediums, talk about storytelling in its many forms, and just kind of engage with that rather than try and fight it. And so it ends up being quite interesting, and it also challenges us in our own ideas of what storytelling is. I never believe that one thing replaces another. It just kind of adds to the fun.
Completes the circle.
So that's the kind of stuff we've done. We've just tried to stay ahead of our game, and be very relevant. So it sometimes works, and sometimes it's just a bit scary. Like I went onto Instagram this year for the first time just to be able to figure out a way in which we can use digital marketing to engage with a much wider audience who really, frankly, will not read that ad in the Times of India to tell them that there's a Lit Fest happening. And so, it's just kind of like, it's interesting because
Sure.
the world is changing really fast, and you kind of have to figure out ways in which you engage with all these new generations, mediums, spaces, etc.
Lucy, you want to give us an insight into your programming process, how the crafting of content, the chiseling. I mean, there is a social conscience that you talk about in your work.
Yes.
So, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, I guess it comes from a place of acknowledging that festivals and cultural institutions are in an incredibly privileged position of being teaching spaces, essentially, and platforms for learning and leadership. And I think that leadership at its heart is service, and service at its heart is listening. So it's really about how to listen well. And consultation is just a huge word in the arts sector at the moment, because we cannot represent a diverse array of voices, Indigenous voices, queer voices, trans voices, women, voices of colour, voices with disabilities, until we consult with those people and talk to them about how we make spaces accessible for them, what culture is, what art is exciting to them, what are they creating, how would they like to talk about it. Not only making spaces for those artists to appear, but involving them at the conceptual creative phase, so that the end product becomes this very, very broadly representative pastiche of, that's a terrible word, but of all kinds of different voices. Does that answer your question?
So, as a researcher, I always believe that social platforms must follow the process of building alumni. So you have people coming back to the platform. So while we all living in urban milieus have the accessibility to power of hashtags, so Insta intrigue as I call it, and what do the platforms feel it relevant to do outreach programs, right? Of course. So to do outreach programs whereby the platform in the urban areas feeds into, apart from its concentric circle, feeds into a larger area. I'll let Namita go first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I was just trying to, think about how we do this expansive thing, because there is a kind of, a couple of things. One is, I think there's a class issue that it becomes a big daunting factor. And when you create these spaces that for some reason eliminates vast numbers of people, partly because of language, and also because of a certain, we all live in a very feudal system, right? So it just doesn't work out. So we have tried to do a lot of get in, participation from student bodies around, in Bombay, because Bombay is the kind of city where it's very geographically sort of like, I guess, any other city, but it's, people from the north don't always come to the south, vice versa, etc. So one of the ways
What happens, it's explained to it, happens in India.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a traffic issue essentially, but it's more than that. I think it's also just these kind of like invisible divides that have existed over the years. So we tried to, for example, get architecture students to come and create an installation, so that we don't want the idea of art. We were trying to think in this way, where why should art only be the artist from the gallery? Let's just try and go beyond the idea and create, art in a much more inclusive way. And that also makes many more people participate in the whole making of the festival. So I think that there are many ways that one has to rethink even those kinds of things to involve different kinds of communities, perhaps by holding little children's competitions, perhaps all, it really is a challenge to think about how to get as widely inclusive as possible. Language being another big sort of barrier.
So, has the Queensland's Poetry Society done work in terms of its outreach? Or in the other, in your upbeat, in your other area of work?
Yes. There's a lot of pressure from arts funding bodies in Australia via the government to represent voices of artists living in rural areas who might not be connected to major metropolises or major cultural institutions. And so I've tried lots of different ways of reaching out to those regions, and the lesson has been, let us do our own thing. We have our own really rich and cultural, rich sort of vibrant culture and art. We don't need help from the big cities. So I guess we've helped them in practical ways, like helping to write funding applications and things like that, because they don't want or need help. Otherwise, we kind of compromise the unique flavour of the art that they're making, and everything becomes blurry.
Interesting, insightful. Kamini?
Yeah, education is just a huge thing at MAP, because till we open the museum, that is the way we are reaching out to the community. And so the idea is to make art an experience for children from all kinds of backgrounds. So we go to the municipal schools, we go to the IB schools, we go to the whole range of schools to see that everyone has that experience. And we're also looking in the long term at how do we reach out to networks that already exist within the system. For example, we're tying up with Agastya. Agastya creates these learning kits for children throughout the state. They even go into smaller towns, into rural areas, and they have this little science and map kit that they have. So we've decided, let's use the existing network that they have rather than try to build ours from scratch, and create a learning, like an arts learning kit. So that's what we're working on. So how do you teach children line, color, form through art? So create a little museum in a box and let it move out to all the little towns and villages. There are areas where they take things on cycles. So education for us is really a very, very important part of what we do at MAP, and how do we reach out to this whole vast
And
community
insightful to tie up with Agastya, because I think they have the largest reach.
Exactly. So we're looking at all other communities as well who would reach
So
out.
if we were to tweak that question for Jagriti and Jagdish, how would you look at, in terms of a theatre festival, in terms of inclusion, does it enter in?
Well, we work with schools in the area, which are Kannada-speaking schools. We also have a lot of students for the Trinity exams from the international schools, the IB and the IGC, GSC. But, there are stories like Indian villages have survived, and I still believe this is an immutable number. There are 600,000 of them in the country. And there were 600,000 of them when I was with Action Aid about 50 years ago, 40 years ago. They're not looking to us to saying, tell us what to do. They've got a culture that survives, that has survived, that will survive after Delhi has choked itself to death. And they don't need any help from us. We are not, and in Action Aid we used to say, we are not here for a handout, we're here for a hand up. But then we used to say, who the hell are we to give them a hand up? So this whole business of outreach, I know you don't know, which is the most un-Gandhian thing. We're now talking about this. They know, they have always known. And they will continue to know long after we have disappeared. But in Jagriti, we say, how do we treat we have an under 11s playwriting program. And people come and say, under 11s? So I said, listen, what did you do as a child? You played hospital, home, father, doctor, cop, robber. You didn't write it down, but you were playing characters. You were speaking a script. The only thing you didn't do was write it down. We all play act. So what is this thing of under 11s not being able to play act? This is
So
the
I think the
whole-
outreach more has been in terms of the, we are seeing a phase of migration like never before. So you have societies which are not within the womb of where they were, or cultures where they were. So in that sense, I think the outreach would be a little tender loving care, if I could put it in that word. Well, coming to our next segment is any drat moment. We'll address the creativity and commerce, but it's a tough area to straddle, to negotiate the path. So, any moment in either of your individual spheres that you have felt like, okay, I'm giving it up, I'm going to do something else. Has that moment ever hit you all?
I think patronage is a big issue when it comes to these kinds of things, and we've been hit by that because, as you know, the Times Lit Fest got cancelled 2 months before it was supposed to happen, and we had to write some 70 groveling letters to people all over the world, telling them that they can't, that it was not happening, and so. I think that patronage is a big issue, and I don't know what the answers are. I mean, Bombay was a city of patronage. It kind of nurtured after the feudal kings and maharajas went away. It was like really the merchant princes of Bombay who nurtured a lot of the Indian classical music spaces and arts. And I don't know what's happening now. I just don't know where the patronage can come from and who we have to rely on. And there's certain families that are still doing it, but it's rather arbitrary and random. And that's why, to me, this festival is just extraordinary because it's a true community festival of well-meaning, like really hats off. And it's just like, sparked all kinds of inspiration and ideas for me to go forward. And so, yeah, the drat moment happened when our Lit Fest got cancelled. It wasn't fun.
Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this follows on very naturally from your point about lack of patronage, which is also an issue in Australia. Burnout, exhaustion happens. That's the big problem, and that's because of underfunding, under-resourcing. There tends to be a 3-year festival directorship cycle in Australia where after somebody's 3rd year, they just cannot do it anymore because there's not enough human power, there's not enough money. And it's true, I'm coming up to my 3rd year at this next festival, and it's true, it happens. And there's, in Australia, sorry, this is slightly going into commerce a little bit, but there's a model, there's an ideal model recommended that's roughly 30% government funded, 30% sponsorship or philanthropy, and 30% earned income through ticket sales and things like that. But obviously, the bucket of arts money, not just in our government but all over the world, is getting completely gutted. So the competition for that 30% is increasingly competitive. So there's pressure on arts organisations to find philanthropists. Almost every job listed in the arts section is fundraising and development professionals because money makes the world go round, and yeah,
Jagdish?
But at the same time, the Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh is holding a 3-day national Adivasi festival next month. And they're going to
Very good example.
It's an incredible effort. And it's going to bring to us visual dance forms that many of us have never seen. As I say, I'm fortunate for the Action Aid years when I used to go into the rural areas. And of course, we would have dance festivals and we would have our sponsors, mainly from Britain. And at one point, I'd have to say, get up, let's leave. And they'd say, no, but they carry. I said, get up, let's leave. Then we'd finally leave, and then when I went out, I'd explain to them, saying, as long as you sat there, they'd keep dancing. And it'll go on all night if it has to. You have to get up, do a namaste, and walk out. Because they have their own lives to lead, we have our own lives to lead, and let's not be in this situation of being beholden to each other. Now, This is what is happening in India. Adivasi festival, unheard of, and at the same time, brilliant.
I request you, Kamini, ki just keep an eye on the monitor.
Quickly, yep.
Yeah.
So I'm really thrilled to hear about the Chhattisgarh Festival, and the Bihar Museum, I think, has done wonderful work there. But if you look otherwise at the institutional support or government support for museums,
Yeah.
it's abysmal, because the government allots less than 0.1% of the budget for museums or for culture. And the corporates, let me tell you, are not much better. It's only 0.8% of CSR that goes to culture or to museums. So it's a struggle all the time, especially for private museums like ours, because I know funding is a huge problem. Okay, we've got the funds together now after the founding member sold part of his collection to raise the money for the land and for the building. But once you get a museum up, how do you run it? So then it comes to the question of an endowment. How do you build this endowment? How do you get people to believe that art can change their lives, that physical well-being is not the only thing, it's your mental well-being as well, and arts can help to change that. So that's the struggle for all of us.
So, what you mentioned, Lucy, if the approximates work in India, the government allocation is about 3,000 crores. But if we just inverse the parameter, 40 million jobs are in the tourism industry. Tourism contributes 240 billion to the GDP. So and you want to grow from 3 trillion to 5 trillion. So I personally just want a quick last thoughts on what Namita said about working in silos. See, there is a tendency for creative industries to work in silos. So there has to be patronage. There has to be a grant writing facility at the art platform, as well as work within the parameters to change. The statistics from the government support are skewed, no doubt. So you can't expect entire funding from there. So quick thoughts on how do we work this formula?
Very quick observation. Tourism has the expenditure it does, but tourism, I think many of you will know, is the largest employer of second-hand employment. The chaps standing outside the hotel now, not now, perhaps it's too cold and it's too late in the evening, who's cutting coconuts and offering it to them, is part of the tourism industry. And like him, there are hundreds of thousands of them. Then it's been estimated that there are 5 people indirectly involved in tourism, and more important, it is the most gender equal industry in the country. 2 things, tourism.
True.
So when we're talking about silos, I've talked enough about commerce, I think, but now about how museums have strategized to change their content so that you actually get people into the museum. So we've re-strategized how do we do our exhibitions, how do we do our programming. But one thing that, and you change the narrative, it's all about storytelling, how does the object talk about the story. But one really interesting comment that I heard from James Bradburn, who was the director of Pinacoteca in Milan, he was talking about so far, it's only in an exhibition or a museum space, though the objects, we change the content, what about the voice? It's always the museum voice. So he said, how do we see that the community has a voice and that we only don't hear one narrative and one communication and one interpretation. So he looked at the text and the labels of the museum, and then he invited various people to write these labels. For example, he asked a child to write a label. He asked an artist to write a label who was connected with that kind of work. What about a scholar? This was an exhibition on China. Got a scholar from China to write rather than have the curator and not have the curator of the museum as the only voice. And I thought it was a wonderful way of bringing the community and multiple voices into the museum space so that you don't just have one voice telling you everything that you should hear and do. And you know that we know it all. Everyone has a perspective to bring in.
Any additions?
I just want to say that I think this is a very fundamental problem of the idea of culture being an extracurricular activity versus, whatever our version of education is, God knows, being co-curricular. Yeah, and I think that somehow someone or a group of people need to take this on to sort of say, wake up and smell the coffee. Like we're just turning into robotic, mentally like challenged people because of all the kind of absurd pressures on us, where culture is kind of a fringe activity, and all the other, So I think that a kind of almost Gandhian force needs to come in to change that narrative and make us just rethink the way we're living our lives, so that this doesn't always become like a challenge and an issue, and sort of like it has to just be. I don't know which society has achieved that really. I can't off the top think, but as as he said, it actually exists in certain communities and in villages already by nature, and in the music, in the evening storytelling, in the way people dress, and we're on some absolutely trip of hubris which is going all haywire. So
we have exactly 2 minutes 51 seconds. Any closing comments? And I can probably take a question or two.
Sure. I guess I'm coming full circle back to thinking about the consumer's role in breaking down those silos. So myself as a consumer of art and culture, where am I putting my art dollars and my art brain? I think we need to make sure that we're consuming art, stories, music, film by women, by people who have from a different culture than you, by people who have faced different challenges than you, and just being conscious of what you're consuming at every level. I think that plays an important, if underrated, role in breaking down categories and silos in arts and culture.
Thank you. It's been tough juggling for such eminent panelists. I think we have a minute and a half for questions, if there are any. We're not able to...
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is somebody there with the mic?
Hello, my name is Rohit. Okay. I'm an architecture student actually, and this question came to me when we were talking about MAP and BIC. Is this the one which is getting constructed, which is being designed by Sumitra Ghosh?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
BIC is different.
Yes, no, MAP, yeah.
MAP, yeah. It's being designed by
So
Sumitra
the
Ghosh.
question would be, if you think about Bangalore, we think about the traffic and where are these people traveling? And the simple answer would be to commute to work and get back to the city. And when you think about a layman, what would he care about? About having more time to spend with his kid, or about the cultural center? Why are we we are traveling around because we don't have space in the city. So when we think about the soul of the city, we are looking forward to addition of more space in the center of the city, or negation of space, or removal of space.
So the question is?
Okay, if I understood your question, the reason why we have paid so much for the land and have chosen that particular location is that everyone can access it easily. It's close to 2 metro stations. When people come into the city...
No. Just a second. I understand
Maybe
that.
we can take this offline? Kamini, she will be here. You can...
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe.
Yeah, sure. I didn't mean... Yeah. And there's one more question. She's coming. Our apologies, we're not able to see with the lights.
Yeah, my question is to Namita, ma'am. How does the corporate look or support for Lit Fest? Like Bombay Film Fest, I heard it's very successful after Reliance and other Kotak and all involved in that one.
sorry, what?
How does corporate support for Times Lit Fest? I heard after Reliance and Kotak and all involved in Bombay Film Festival,
So-
it is very successful model running.
So basically, it works. The way it works is that corporates sponsor the festival and essentially pay for the extraordinary real estate cost of the venue and all the various other things that go into it. It's simply that. It's a profit-making enterprise. And that's where the problem lies. So when the economy goes down and the sponsors go away, you have no culture, in short.